Hello, my name is Angelina Ceja. I work for AgSafe. We are a nonprofit organization, and today's topic is pesticide safety. First, I want to start with our disclaimer. These publicly available materials are being used for informational purposes only by AgSafe, and their use is not intended to imply that the Environmental Protection Agency or the federal government endorses the use or the content of the training materials today. So some of our learning objectives. I will be reviewing the purpose of the Worker Protection Standard. I will also talk about some areas of pesticide safety implementation in the workplace. I will identify some resources for implementing and documenting pesticide safety in the workplace. I will also talk a little bit about some of the resources provided, and these are resources that will be provided or have been provided to those individuals taking the class or can be downloaded online. So what is the purpose of the Worker Protection Standard? So the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Agricultural Worker Protection Standard is aimed at reducing the risk of pesticide poisoning and injury among agricultural workers and pesticide handlers. The first of its kind in terms of the standard happened in 1993 in what is the mainland United States. In 2015, it got an update, again in the mainland United States. And while you're in a territory, you still should practice these guidelines to ensure that you're keeping both your workers safe and yourself safe when you're using pesticides. So a couple of things that happen with the Worker Protection Standard is we're going to talk a little bit about pesticide safety. We're also going to talk about decontamination supplies. We're going to review what to do in case of an emergency, what types of personal protective equipment one should be wearing, and then just how do you stay compliant or even just how do you stay safe when you're using pesticides. So first and foremost, we want to start with just general pesticide safety. And how do you work safely with pesticides on the farm? We want to remind you that pesticides, those include fungicides, insecticides, rodenticides, and herbicides, are really meant to kill. Our fungicides are meant to kill fungus that grows on plants or your product. Insecticides, those insects, rodenticides, any rodents you might have, herbicides, weeds. They're all meant to kill. So the last part of the word there, the ICIDE, we're really talking about how to kill. And just as a reminder, anything you're using to kill a pest is not considered medicine. It really is something that's going to kill. It's not necessarily going to help the plant. So making sure that you understand that pesticides are poison and that you need to keep them away from your family members or anyone that isn't supposed to be using them or hasn't been trained or knows how to use them. When we're talking about pesticide safety, it's important to remember that we have primary sources of exposure to pesticide. So pesticides can be absorbed through our skin, and that is the primary basis for most pesticide exposures. You can also get them in your eyes. You can get them by inhaling, so breathing in air that is contaminated or a pesticide. You can also get them from accidentally ingesting, drinking, or taking pesticides. And sometimes this happens when they're placed in containers that are used for food or for drinking. So making sure that we're not doing that. We're not placing pesticides in containers for drinking or or consumption or eating. So there are quite a few places where we might find residues of pesticides, even when you're already done using the pesticide, that you need to be made aware of, and you need to make sure you're keeping them in locations or cleaning them after use. So in this example, in this picture here, we have some items that could potentially contain pesticide residues or even pesticides. If you were using work boots, as those pictured and circled here in red, we want to make sure we're cleaning them off prior to removing them and then placing them in a safe location away from our family members because they could become sick if they're exposed to pesticides. We also have on here gloves. So again, we wear those on our hands to protect our skin from pesticide exposure, but those again, if they are one-time use, should be thrown away. If you can wash them, they should be washed before being put away. The same thing with a respirator that sits on this chair. The respirator should be cleaned and then stored away, preferably in a clean container. Anything that's plastic storage where you can have a lid or even a plastic bag, a clean plastic bag that you can seal for use the next time. So making sure that any sort of supplies we're using or equipment we're using, that we're making sure that we're keeping it in a location where we've cleaned it first and then we've put it away. So it's not accessible and we won't get sick from it, from any pesticides that might be left. Other places where you might be able to find pesticide residues would be on the product. So here we have some tomatoes. You can find it on the tomatoes. Again, the personal protective equipment this person is using, his boots, his gloves, even his clothing, his long sleeve shirt, his pants. You can find it on the hat. You can find it on the plants, on the dirt, on any irrigation equipment you're using, and which is why it's so important that you wear your equipment and then that you wash after your use. So making sure you're washing your hands with soap and water, and we'll talk about this a little bit later as well. Other places where you might find pesticide residues, again, on tree branches, on plants, on the ground as we're walking through the areas that we've just, where we've applied pesticides. So they can be found anywhere. Again, you can find them in your agricultural setting. You can even find them sometimes in the air. So depending on when you apply your pesticide, making sure people stay out of the areas where you've applied your pesticide, remembering you can inhale the pesticide and that can make you sick. When you have pesticides, it is important that you store, even moving and disposing of them in a proper way. So you want to make sure you're keeping your pesticides in the original labeled container. Again, that you're not moving them to containers such as water bottles. So that's no for water bottles. No for anything where you can put food in it. You want to keep them in the original container so you know what it is and where it's at. You also want to make sure you keep them in a location that's away from children and other individuals who maybe work with you or are on the farm with you. It is a good idea to lock up all of your pesticides when they are not in use. So using a lock to make sure that no one gets in and can accidentally be hurt by the pesticides. Don't put them in any sort of leaking containers or leave them unsecured. As you can see, there are some pictures here that demonstrate the proper way and then the not proper way of storing. If you can, put a sign that says that what is kept there is poison and to keep out and to make sure it's closed and locked up. When you're almost done using your pesticide in that original container, and you have very little left, you want to make sure that you are rinsing at least 3 times, closing the container, shaking it, and then rinsing it and putting that rinse water back into where you're doing your mix. So if that's a backpack sprayer, that it's going into the backpack sprayer for use. You're not throwing it on the ground. You're not throwing it out somewhere where it's going to affect something else. And then follow your location's policies around disposing. Do not use the empty containers for other things. You do still have residues and they can make someone sick if you use them for other household purposes. So avoid using those. Puncture if possible. So you want to kind of cut through, as you can see there from the picture below, and make sure that they are not being used for other things. And then throw away or get rid of or recycle as appropriate in your location. So we've talked a little bit about where we can find pesticides, how to store them properly, but sometimes you might suffer from exposure to pesticides. So you might feel irritation in your eyes, perhaps your throat or your nose are irritated. You might get a rash on your skin, and you might not feel well. So if you do get pesticides on you, there are certain things you can do right away to minimize. Remember, you still want to seek medical attention if you are exposed to pesticides or believe you've been exposed to pesticides that are making you sick. One of the things you can do is if you get pesticides in the eyes is you want to make sure you're keeping your eyes open and flushing with clean water for at least 15 minutes, like you can see from this picture. So you want to make sure you have enough water to flush your eyes for at least 15 minutes. Again, you want to find a clinic or medical doctor to look at your eyes after you've flushed. If you inhale and it makes you cough, it doesn't make you feel well, if you can, move to fresh air, loosen any excess clothing you might have. If there is someone there available who is trained to provide first aid that includes CPR, if the person isn't breathing, ask them to start. And this is only if the person is not breathing. You want to make sure you're seeking medical attention, again, a clinic or your doctor immediately. If you get it on your skin, you want to make sure you're removing any contaminated clothing and that you're washing your skin with soap and cool water if you can find it, and making sure you're seeking medical attention immediately. If you happen to accidentally ingest, either drink or eat pesticide, you want to make sure you follow the label on the pesticide for directions for care. They will give you examples of things you can do and cannot do. Make sure you seek medical attention immediately. If you're unable to read the label, make sure you seek medical attention immediately. So you want to make sure that you are wearing the appropriate clothing to work. That is protecting you from pesticide exposure. On the left, we see a person and we see certain things. Where you see the circles are the areas of the skin, or the areas of the body, where you might be a little bit more prone to being infected or affected by pesticides. On the right, we see what type of clothing you might want to wear if you're using pesticides. So some of the things you want to use are long sleeve shirt, long pants. You want to use some sort of head covering. You might want to use gloves, eye protection, so the goggles versus the sunglasses. You also want to put on rubber boots or work boots, depending on what you're applying. Make sure you're protecting yourself. You want to make sure you're also wearing socks. Make sure you're protecting as much of your body as possible, skin, eyes, nose, and mouth, to minimize exposure. Things you should not be wearing while using pesticides: shorts, flip-flops, short sleeve shirt. So make sure you've got the adequate amount of clothing available to protect your skin. Other things we need to remember is that we go home at the end of the day and we might have been using pesticides. It is very important that you remove your clothing after you get home from work, that you put it in a separate container from the family, and that you wash it separately. You also want to make sure that you are washing, that you are taking a shower or a bath before you have contact with your family. So some of the recommendations is you wash your clothing separate from the other family's clothing if they haven't been out helping you. You wash clothing using hot water, using detergent, and if you can, after washing your clothing, you rinse a second time to wash away any residues. If you can, you want to line dry, as sunlight helps to break down possible residues from your clothing. Under the Worker Protection Standard, there are requirements for training of field workers and pesticide handlers. We have some added resources for you that you can use to train if you do have workers. If you are the sole proprietor, you still want to follow good practices and make sure that you are providing yourself with the protection from pesticides. Some of the things you want to make sure you have on hand are soap, water, and paper towels. And this is in case you get something on your skin, on your eyes, if you breathe it, or inhale it. So you want to make sure you have some decontamination supplies. If you're handling, if you're mixing, if you're applying pesticides, you want to make sure you have enough water where you're doing your mix to rinse your eyes in case you get water in your eyes, or to rinse. If you're out away from where you have your supplies, or if going to get your supplies means you're going back into the area you just sprayed or treated, then you want to make sure you have with you a couple of gallons of water, soap, paper towels, an eye wash, right? So a little bit of eye wash and coverall, so you can change out if you got it on your clothing. And there's some pictures of what those look like. You want to make sure that you choose the correct personal protective equipment for the application you are doing. And how do you know what you need? The pesticide label will tell you what type of personal protective equipment you minimally need to use in order to stay safe. Some items you can rewash and reuse. Other items you will have are one-time use, and after your application you should be tossing or throwing away because they contain pesticide residues. If you have reusable items, it is important that you wash them, like mentioned previously, and you put them away in a clean location, preferably away from where you store your pesticides. So you want to find a different spot for those items. Again, if they're one-time use, you are throwing them away after your application. The pesticide label will tell you that after application, there usually is a time period, it's called the restricted entry interval, in which no one should enter the treated area. The picture you see in front of you is the poster provided by U.S. Environmental Protection Agency that in the mainland United States is required for posting of areas that have been treated if the restricted entry interval is greater than 48 hours in outdoor areas. Reading the pesticide label will help ensure that if there are requirements for staying out of the area, and specifically if you need to post the area, that you do that. The other thing too is making sure that anyone that's going to be working with you, that includes your family members, that you're letting them know when you've applied a pesticide in your field not to go in after you apply it, to wait. The pesticide label will tell you the amount of hours you should be waiting before you enter, making sure that you let everyone or anyone that you know might have access to that field to stay out. So it is not recommended you go in. You should be staying out. Remember, pesticides kill, and that time period is when the pesticide is working, when it's doing what it's supposed to do, and it can affect your health if you go into this area and that restricted entry interval has not expired. So stay out of the area. I have mentioned that if you are using pesticides, you need to make sure that you read the label. The labels are normally in English. If you don't know how to read, if you need extra assistance, the pesticide department can help. Your local agencies, again, that deal with pesticides are there to help you. The label has a lot of useful information, including what to do in case of an emergency, in case we need first aid. It also has the restricted entry interval time, how many hours I'm supposed to stay out. It has the personal protective equipment you should be wearing. So it mentions a lot of things, the application amount for what you're using the pesticide for, how to mix into a tank or how to mix into a backpack sprayer. So making sure you're following the instructions, and if you're not sure, that you ask for help. Like I mentioned previously, we have a great number of resources that you can find on the internet. We have resources from members such as the Pesticide Educational Resource Collaborative. There's also the United States Environmental Protection Agency, American Samoa EPA Pesticide Resources, the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources, Integrated Pest Management, and then AgSafe, who I work for, will also have resources available for you. I encourage you to talk to American Samoa EPA to get more information. If you need help with applications, if you're not sure, they are there to help. I want to thank you all for your time and attention with this valuable resource. Have a great day.